Hey there. Hey, gorgeous. Welcome. Welcome to Lost in Our 40s, a podcast by women for women where we talk about life. Welcome in. Today, I have a story for you. So yesterday I went down a rabbit hole on YouTube. Well, not so much a rabbit hole, not so much. I discovered a lady called Evie Poumpouras. I think her name is. She's written a book called Becoming Bulletproof. I haven't read it, but she's an ex-CIA agent, and I found her very, very interesting. But the point of this is that one of the statistics that she pulled out was that, and she must have mentioned where she got it from, was that 70% of the population have lived through some kind of trauma. 70%. So now I don't know if these statistics are from the US or across the globe, but it made me think about, or it raised something that had been in my mind. I've been having this conversation with myself, thinking about African upbringing, the African story, because in Africa, so if you're in your 40s, so that's my age set, so born in the 70s. So if you're in your 40s, your parents born a generation before, and then your grandparents a generation before that, were the ones who were really in the heart of colonialism. So colonialism is this concept where foreigners came in, took over the land, took over the government, took over everything, took over the structures. So the people were forced to abandon their usual ways of life. The people were forced to take up things like capitalism. So it was a full I have the word in French, the full arrachement, the full taking away, like unearthing a whole culture and supplementing it fully with something foreign. So that in itself is undoubtedly some form of trauma. But beyond that, then you had these generations of people forced to acclimatize, forced to learn how to live within this new system. And the handicap was not being able to lean on traditions. In fact, there was quite a big effort at killing traditions. So a lot of traditional African practices were vilified, were said to be evil. And the direction was towards religion. So the religion, Islam, Christianity, mostly those two. So the force towards those religions, the teachings that whatever traditional religions might have existed are no longer good. And this super traumatic event that left a people, a continent really, a continent violated, was difficult. So with that background, I think of our generation. So this generation that is now in their 40s is probably the first time that there is real capacity to look at the psychological effects. Not that the others couldn't, but that they were not really as well placed. The our grandparents, especially, they were in the thick of it. Our parents were then struggling to figure out how to deal with this new way of being, how to survive really in terms of entering this new capitalistic model and figuring out how to make a living. So, in terms of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they would for a longer part have been figuring out how to survive in this new set of affairs. So, our generation was then more set up in terms of having lived from the trauma. I shouldn't even use hand quotes. The trauma of colonialism, there's been some time that has passed. And yes, we have been ripped away from our roots to a larger extent. And we have had the stability of living within the new paradigm that was brought in by the West and have become a little more settled. Concepts such as self I'm trying to think of how it's phrased in the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Because in the Maslow hierarchy of needs, you have at the very base is food, clothing, shelter. You need these things that you just need to be able to make it. You need to be able to have to make it on a day by day basis. Oh, I should have checked this first before I started talking about Maslow. I can't remember the middle one, but the top one is like self actualization, self getting to know yourself, getting to not so much self improvement, but getting to expand on who you are, which is the area that our generation, this one, and of course the generations after us, and probably the generations after us much better than us, having this capacity to move away from the troubles of life and have more of a philosophical approach. And this is where you start thinking about psychology, the things that have affected you in the past, how it made you be. So in that context, I happened to read a book called it was called Complex PTSD. I can't remember the tagline, but it was by Pete Walker. And in that book, I came across a concept that I found really, really mind blowing for myself, because it was giving words to something I didn't realize existed. So we say that the thing with words, if you don't have words for something, it might as well not be there, which is a concept in the book 1984, where we had these leaders who were creating like a new language by removing some of the words. So and the intention or the idea was that if there is no word to name a concept, then the mind is not really able to formulate the concept, because the mind thinks in words. Yes. So what he talked about was emotional flashbacks. Emotional flashbacks. So why this is so interesting to me, at least, was that we've touched on trauma. I have a session that's about identifying if there might have been some trauma in your past. And I may or may not have mentioned there that trauma need not be this gigantic thing that happened. It could absolutely be, but there are other things which might be of smaller effect. In fact, I go back to Evie Poumpouras. She apparently was there when the 9/11 bombings occurred. So that's something that you can look back and see is significantly big. And then there is the day-to-day living at home. So the reason I've brought up the African family context is that they're listening to people, my own childhood, listening to my friends, listening to people speak. There's a lot of laughter about some kind of violence in the home. So children being beaten for not doing what they're meant to do. And generally as a society, I think we accept this. We just take this to be how children must be raised. So being hit by a parent is not something we consider traumatic, because that is just the ways of the world. Then we had, at least in Kenya, we had the school systems remove corporal punishment, so the beating of children in schools, a number of years back. And even then, there was a bit of an uproar of how do you expect children to be disciplined if they're not beaten? So the concept of instilling some kind of fear into children is something that's undoubtedly still there today. I do not know whether that's necessarily something that was in our traditions way back when we had this communal living and, the child belonged to the village. To what extent this need for severe punishment existed, I haven't done any kind of research on that, so I cannot really tell. But I am alluding to the fact that, or the view, that there are practices that were lost, and that because of the loss of that practices after colonialism and the attachment to the traditional way of life, the new practices that have come up, children having to wake up and go to school, and then being forced out of bed. I was listening to a podcast by it's in Kikuyu, a language in Kenya. It's called Kacheche podcast. It's hilarious. If you can understand the language, please go listen to them. And they were talking about an incident where so the girl who was speaking, she's the main host, was explaining of an incident where her mother was waking her up at 5:30 in the morning to do some maths homework, because the mother didn't think that if she left her the whole day, it was during the school holidays, so the mother felt that if she left her at home and told her to do it during the day, she wouldn't. So the mother left home at 6, so wanted the girl to wake up at 5:30, do the math, and then, go on with the rest of her day. So she was explaining the situation when it first came up, when the mother first sought to wake her up. And she tells it very funnily, and I think that's the thing with a lot of stories that people share about their childhood. We probably remember them with a tint of humor, but at the time, and she does explain, she was bundled out. She spoke back, so her mother came, woke her up. She was meant to hear the alarm. The alarm was in her mother's bedroom. She was meant to hear the alarm when it goes off, so she did not hear the alarm. So the mother came to wake her up, and when the mother came to wake her up, she talked back. And this talking back was something very minor, to the extent of, I'm not the one who decided to be waking up at 5:30. And the mother, of course, couldn't take any talking back. So she bundled her out of bed and really started beating her. And when she started crying, the mother put a slipper in her mouth to stop her from crying. And then she was saying, what will the neighbors say if they hear me beating my child at 5:30 in the morning? They'll think I'm crazy. So there's a lot of hilarity in the telling of that story. But looking back now, with the eyes of adulthood and the compassion of adulthood towards the child, and I'm taking her example because it's out there, it's a story that she told, it's possible to think back and see that this should not be normal. That it should not be normal to beat your child black and blue to get them to do math sums at 5:30 in the morning. So regardless of the reasoning behind why the waking up was there and that kind of thing, the mother herself even then could feel that there would be something wrong with the neighbors hearing her beating her child at 5:30 in the morning. And so there's layers to that. So is it the beating the child? Is it the extent of the beating? Is it the time of the beating? But putting ourselves in the shoes of this podcaster, at that age, I think she must have been around 15, I think, or 16. She said she was in Form 2. So I think she must have been around 16. So at the point when she was being shaken out of bed and being thrashed when she was hardly awake, the feeling that one goes through, and that this is the parent, you have nowhere to go, this is your one refuge. So the feeling that one goes through is a feeling of, first of all, fear, intense fear. And it is these things, these small things, but large things. In looking back, we don't necessarily see them as impactful. And after that, she never spoke back to her mother, which was the whole intention. And she would, after that, wake up at 5:30 diligently to do her sums, whether or not she agreed with the requirements. So these levels of instilling discipline are traumatic, or they can be traumatic, because trauma, we said, is the not the thing that happens, but the fact that it separates you from yourself, that it has that kind of effect, that kind of long-lasting effect. So going back to the description of the emotional flashback, in trauma, someone who has experienced trauma will often have flashbacks that take them back to that situation. So where was I? So when you have a flashback, it takes you back to this. It takes you back. It feels as if you've traveled back in time to that situation. So what I was aware of was this idea of pictures. You get pictures of what it is that happened. But in the concept of the emotional feedback that I learned from that book from Pete Walker, then there is the possibility to then have the feeling. So there are no images. So if we take this example from this podcaster, and I hope she doesn't mind my using her example. I hope she doesn't mind it, but and I'm not saying she's traumatized, probably not, or rather I shouldn't say maybe she is, maybe she's not by this event. But if if she were then to go back to that event and feel the fear, that fear of being shaken out of bed can impact her life today in ways that she is not aware. So maybe at the point of public speaking, as an example, because of this, or the reason that she was being beaten was because she spoke back. Then maybe the learning becomes, I should not speak. So it could be that she finds herself unable to speak, but at the point of speaking, maybe she goes through some intense feeling of anxiety. And anxiety is a form of fear. And she might not be able to put in that connection. And it's just this feeling that overcomes her at the point of having to speak. And I really should be using my own examples. I should leave the poor girl alone and use my own example. My own example has a lot to do with food. In my upcoming book, Date Like Cleopatra, I do have a section there where I talk about a traumatic event that had to do with lack of access to food. So I had a nanny, a house girl, who wouldn't feed me. So it was a small incident. I never forgot it, but it wasn't a small incident. I absolutely should not say that. But in terms of my memory, whenever I think back to it, I didn't think much of it. I didn't think it had much of an impact in my life. But now, because of this work, the inner work that I've been doing, trying to look more into myself, trying to understand myself more, trying to actualize myself, if that's a word in Maslow's pyramid, I then have become more conscious of what I do and why I do it. I ask myself a lot of questions when I'm in a certain situation. So I'm the kind of person who gets hangry. These people who are angry when they're hungry. And I was looking into that, and although I'm really minimizing it as I speak now, it's a, for me it has become it. I've noticed that it is quite a big deal. But one of the reasons that ties in that anger to the hunger is because it is it is a fear as well. It is a fear response that what if there is no food? What if I do not get fed? So it ties back to something that happened when I was 3. Yeah, and it's then something that is pulling me in a way that I'm not consciously aware, because I don't I hadn't tied the association. So now that I did so recently tie it, I find it in other areas of my life. When you say, I'll use the Swahili word nasikia sijui aje, which means I don't know how I'm feeling. I have a feeling in my system, I can't pinpoint it. And that could be a key in terms of trying to figure out what feeling there is in the body, and then trying to tie it back. Because first of all, it's a realization. It's a realization that you're feeling fear, as an example. Why are you feeling fear? Because there might be nothing happening. And this realization that the emotions that you're experiencing at a particular point in time might not have anything to do with what is going on in the outside world is then what can tell you that you're having an emotional flashback. You have gone back in time to feel the way you felt at the point of the trauma that you experienced. And what Pete Walker says is actually that the first point is to recognize it and to tell yourself, I am having a flashback. Because then with this, you can then, in my case, if it's a flashback to the fear that there might be no food, then it can be a conversation with myself that, if I'm at home, to look around the home and see there is food. There is food. There is capacity for food at some point. That I'm not going to starve. I am okay. I'm an adult. I'm in an adult body. I can take care of myself now. I do not need to live in fear of the nanny into my adulthood. To appreciate that it's a feeling that can come up. But then if I do notice it, then I can try and figure out ways to deal with it. And just to give you a couple more examples, the other thing he says is, I feel afraid, but I am not in danger. I am safe now, here in the present. Another one is deconstruct eternity thinking. Probably as a child, when I wasn't being fed, I thought that this would go on forever. This would go on forever. I would never eat again. So now to be able to come back into the present and tell myself that if I'm hungry now at this present moment, but it shall pass. I will eat. I don't need to seek out the food as a comfort. It is going to come. It is not. I don't need to be in a constant state of eating to be okay. I can wait for the mealtime to arrive if I'm hungry before, or yeah. Just to pick another example is to resist the inner critic's drasticizing and catastrophizing. So the inner critic is a voice in the head, the voice that then in my case maybe is telling me that, oh no, we're hungry, we have to eat. If we don't eat, no, then if there's danger. There's danger if you're not eating. We have to protect ourselves and eat. And in the example of the Kacheche podcaster, in the situation with her mother, it might be something along the lines of, we can't speak, you're not allowed to speak. If you speak, you're going to be in danger. Keep quiet, you must keep quiet. Do not speak back, do not speak at all, do not, that kind of thing. So the inner critic is this voice in the mind that might be from the source of the trauma, or in my case, the example I've given might be just because it becomes a voice that you tell yourself. It becomes your voice. You don't hear it as someone else talking. It's you talking to yourself. But then being able to look at it and realize that there is a part of me that is always trying to not always, that often tries to criticize what I'm doing, tell me that I'm doing wrong, tell me that I am wrong. So being able to recognize that voice and try to reduce the volume, reduce the impact that they have on you. Yeah. So these are just a couple of examples. If you Google Pete Walker, he has a website, and he has this list available as a PDF on that website for free download. So if this is a topic that is of interest to you, I would recommend it, and I would actually recommend his book. It was it was interesting for me. I found it quite revealing, especially with this notion of fresh concepts that come up. His own story was that he lived in a dangerous household. His parents were never for him, so because of that, he was constantly slapped, constantly talked down to. Him and his sister always told they were good for nothing. That kind of background, and then he developed complex PTSD, and he's a psychologist and probably got into the field to just try and learn more about this. And he had been, by the time he wrote that book, he had been in the field for more than 20 years. So he gives advice of what he's done with his patients, what has helped him, and he gives a number of examples. So it is a useful resource. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for spending time with me. I truly appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, Bridget. Music by Atemi Oyungu. Content and production by me, Shiro. Get in touch at lostinourforties.com.